All right. Greetings, everyone. I'm Uttam Kumar, Partner Development Manager at DataGaps. Welcome you to the second edition of Trusted Data Summit powered by DataGaps. For this session today, I take immense pleasure to introduce our speaker, Sonpal Parmar. He's a Principal Engineer, VP of Reporting and Analytics at NatWest Group, and brings with him a wealth of expertise in reporting platforms and analytics. With his extensive experience, he has contributed significantly in the area of business intelligence and data validation. Today, he will share with us his insights on enriching reporting platforms Route to Life with BI Validator. With his talk, he will navigate us through the key challenges and the opportunities in this domain. During the session, I would request all the attendees to please submit their questions in the Q&A section near the top right corner of the window. In the interest of time, the speaker would take up the question at the end of the session. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Sonpal Parmar to deliver his talk. Sonpal, now the floor is yours.
Thanks, Uttam. Thanks for the introduction. I'm really excited to be speaking at TBS 2024. So thanks for having me here. We have a packed agenda, so let's get started. So in the brief agenda description, we will go through the route to life, the construct around route to life, and the basic foundation. As we describe the construct around route to life. We'll talk through the common testing problems, the shift-left approach of testing, and the test-driven development and the behavior-driven development construct. Further on, I'll talk through primarily our journey with BI Validator, the challenges that we had, how we went about the overall exercise of build versus buy, how we made the decision, and interesting thought on return on investment on testing tool and how the server capacity results in basically justifying the cost for the investment that we have done in automated testing tool. We'll certainly have time for questions. So with this, moving on and establishing the construct of route to life. Now, Toyota, as we know, a world famous manufacturer, they introduced the construct of optimization on the shop floor in terms of the number of vehicles that go out, the number of vehicles which go out on a daily basis without defect. Right? Later, the construct was taken up with name called part to production, and from a software development lifecycle perspective, we understand it as route to life. Right? The route to life is basically that foundation where the starting of the project, where we look at the construct of starting a discussion with the users in terms of taking the requirements, understanding and translating them into designs, building process, having the testing done, and then releasing it to production, and basically having the user use this functionality. Right? So that's the overall user journey which we are talking about, and having a sound automated route to life makes a lot of difference in terms of having users get the right features in time. And this process, we have seen how the companies like Amazon and Facebook, they do 15, 20, 30 releases every day, every hour for that matter. And we as a bank have a totally different perspective on this because we want to ensure that the governance is in place, whatever goes out to customer, because we are a bank. So we need to ensure that while we don't compromise on any of the banking functionality because it impacts people's money, we still want to have that process optimized to an extent that we roll out the features very regularly. We cannot compare ourselves with the likes of Amazon or some of the e-commerce companies and the scale at which they deliver, but we still want to have automated route to life. Now, looking at the ambit of enterprise solutions which now exist, which were not there, for instance, GitLab. So GitLab delivers us that functionality of having end-to-end CICD done and defined. Same as with JIRA, where you can have agility to your work management, and ServiceNow from a change management perspective as well, and also provide the functionality of observability, where you could basically measure. I'm putting data gaps right in there with the work that we have done, and then the shift left approach of testing, where the BI Validator tool that we actually used, we went about the overall exercise of looking at the test plans, the stress performance test, and then the pre-built nature of this actually helped us bring the route to life together with the GitLab and ServiceNow, where now we have optimized the user journeys, and basically we are moving ahead in terms of having faster releases done from monthly to twice a month, and then we'll optimize it further. Now there is another construct which I want to put a perspective on, is the DORA metrics. Now DORA metrics basically helps us measure how we are doing the software development and the way we are performing, right from having the code in production, the defect management. So addresses the quality of automation that we have done, how much agile we have become, what controls we have in place, and whether we have the right lineage build, and how does the time to market gets around in that way, basically delivering the timely solution to the user. So with this construct, let's move ahead and talk through a bit on shift left. So the common testing problem that we have seen so far is with a waterfall approach. We always had the testing done at the fag end. We got to know of the defects right at the end, where the time was not there, and users are waiting for the product to be released, and the testing cycle it was a challenge. You get the defects right at the fag end. You have to go back to the dev cycle and basically do that iterative management of the requirement again, and then go back to testing. So big bang, little time to react. Obviously, some of the defects were recognized very late, so that results in projects getting delayed. And considering testing, in a project life cycle, generally takes up 30 to 50% of the projects. Depends on what kind of project you are doing. So it's important that we seize the opportunity and look at the shift left testing approach. We've started to do it from a NatWest perspective, with agility built into the system, and because I was really in the flow, and okay. So route to life, I think this is the one that I talked to in terms of user journeys and basically the DORA metrics and all of the bits. Now, looking at the shift left, which I was just talking to. So shift left is where the question of having the testing done early that factor comes into picture, and basically what we want to do is we want to have developers do the initial bit of testing. We want to have the testing done quite early in the cycle, the defects recognized quite early in the cycle, and that's where the whole opportunity lies with the test-driven approach, and also the behavior-driven approach, where we recognize what the customer is looking at, and basically accordingly have the shift left approach, right? And frankly, from a result perspective, it will result in the reduced cost, overall cost will be much faster, more efficient, we've seen the quality also improves with time. So establishing this construct, let's deep dive into a bit of our journey into BI Validator. And the problem statement that we have is primarily around testing for OBI, Oaks, Tableau. So we use most of these reporting tools, and we are doing a migration. We're planning a migration in 2023, back in 2023, to have a good volume of reports migrated from OBI to Oaks. It was a lift and shift project, and the need for a testing tool came up. Oracle used to have a solution called Business Validation Tool, but point is, it was not addressing all the problems that we had, because we had to do custom development along with it, and testing 50,000, 60,000 reports is not a joke. So we started to wander around and look for a solution which basically meets our needs. So in that regard, we went about recognizing the challenges with building a solution from scratch. We looked at options in the market, and we wanted a solution which basically fits the bill, had pre-built testing scenarios, and also fits the overall book to life cycle as well. So that's where we wanted to basically go to the market, look at a solution, and look at the build versus buy approach as well, where we spend time and build a solution. 2023 back end, we had less time on hand, and building something from scratch would have taken 6 to 9 months to basically go about that exercise. So we spent some time looking at what options exist in the market, and our decision basically was based on the data that we collected while we looked at different options. So, for instance, building a solution from scratch, we looked at Selenium and Silk as the tools, and they're good tools in the market. But point is that we basically have to craft everything around these and build everything from scratch. The time to market would have been 6 to 9 months, and we initially estimated that it's going to be a good amount that we have to invest to basically get a solution of a quality which actually fits the bill and meets our requirements. So with this, we looked at the buy option as well. BI Validator was something which Oracle recommended, and we also did some research in terms of what the capability of the tool is. Checkmate was another option which we looked at a few years back from Red Pill Analytics. I think the ownership has changed now, and Genesis CI from Based Ops. These are key solutions that we kind of evaluated. There were a lot of strength which BI Validator presented in terms of the capabilities, the test plans. So, this is the initial analysis. We looked at BI Validator and we went about experimenting with it. We spent a few months experimenting in 2023 and then in 2024 early, and then we decided to license the product. So our journey basically started right in 2023, but we eventually went about decision and basically licensed it. So the key factors that we went about was the low upfront cost, because we wanted to start start small. So we talked through for 2 licenses. So it was very reasonable as far as the start is concerned. Uh, there was no testing capability needed because users could easily go on and look at the solution and start to use the tool. So it was a turnkey solution. And the good thing was that our test cases test scenarios were pre-modeled for Oaks, Tableau, Power BI. We were primarily looking at Oaks, but we started to look at Tableau and NQ and Sheet as well. So really strong product. When we started the journey, we made the decision, in the next few months about going ahead with BI Validator. Right? So in this regard, one of the interesting things which have happened is the discussion around server capacity. Now, when you go about investing in a new company and basically looking at a new solution, there are a lot of question marks raised in terms of how do we justify the ROI. And from day one itself, the question started to come from management how we justify the ROI on the tool, right? So we were actually evaluating the capacity and of the servers, and we looked at we forecasted a capacity based on the existing capacity which was there for Oracle BI. And at that point, we said, 40 OCPUs is something which we need for the whole of Route Life, which included the dev servers, 2 of the dev servers, the set environment, the UAT environment, the production environment. And at that point, because the licensing for those happens, this is the number of servers that you take from Oracle, and they're classified as OCPUs. So we went about that exercise and we said we need 40 because that's how the production capacity looks. Although Oracle kind of confirmed that you might need lesser capacity because these are highly performing servers, but we don't want to compromise on user performance. We went about 40, and the cost was coming around 48K. Now these are some of the imaginary numbers which I'm saying. Don't quote me on the exact figures. The number of users basically were 2,000. Number of reports were around 15,000 to the system. While that's the capacity which we plan to provision, we utilize the stress test plan, the performance test plan, and basically once the test results started to come in, it was amazing to see that we actually don't need that much capacity. And we even did a break-even test of having to have 4,000, 6,000 users use that capacity, and it was working fine. So it was a kind of a revelation in terms of saying that we might need a low capacity. So the actual server capacity is actually almost 60% of what we initially envisioned, which means a lower net outgo, and with the same set of users, same number of reports. So our investment, which is because we are still experimenting with the tool, the power of BI Validator. We invested for just 2 new users, and I think the ROI was instant. In first 4 months itself, we basically on this basis itself we can justify the ROI. But the tool is really strong. The tool, one is the pre-built scenarios which are there, and the scale which you can basically operate at in terms of testing out those 15,000 reports at once is certainly massive. The integration which it brings in, along with the CICD cycle, improves the time to market. these are really important factors for us. And one of the scenarios which I recall while working with the solution was around experimenting with Tableau. So we have quite a good number of installations of Tableau, and we started to look at Tableau testing as well. And so far so good. I think the strength of the tools talks for itself in terms of the fitment into fitment with the existing tools which are there, like GitLab CICD, and it can be integrated with the pipeline, overall pipeline. So that talks a lot about the way the solution is kind of presented to us. With the improved time to market, I think the story is further strengthened. So we are happy to partner with Data Gaps in exploring further solutions from them to have a better route to life and better time to market. One of the things which I recall, which really resonated with the strength of the team was we were actually experimenting with the solution, and while the stress testing and the performance testing scenarios were looked at, we went out to the team and we said, it's just showing the start results and end results. It doesn't show anything in between. And the proactiveness of the team is really appreciable, and it was. I felt it was quite a good turnaround with the scenario presented to us in 3 weeks. A quick development cycle, and it was kind of end-to-end development was done, and we could see the results right then and there. I feel basically the partnership. We want to carry forward the partnership further, and we want to explore more solutions which are around data, because I understand there are data sheets which are there. So I'll probably end my presentation here. I'm happy for any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sonpal. So we have a couple of questions here coming from attendees. So the first question is, how easy or difficult was it to consider buy rather than build, considering the security aspect of the banking infrastructure?
So good question, I would say, and we actually considered consulting the taking the governance and security aspect into picture, and the decision was not easy, because having a solution from outside and incorporating into the bank, you have to do a lot of things in terms of pen testing to ensure that the tool doesn't dissolve any of the security which is put in place. We basically have to do multiple steps in terms of basically justifying it to the management, testing the tool within the bank itself, having the governance addressed properly, and that's where it took some time initially for us to basically one, prove to the management, to justify the ROI, 3 have the fitment done, and have the security and governance addressed. So yeah, it was not easy, but considering the strength of the tool and the quick ROI that we got, I think it was a decision which was certainly was done in the right earnest. So no regrets.
Okay, great. Yeah, The next question we have is, how does BI Validator ensure data accuracy and consistency across different environments?
Good question. So basically, we used it for hooks, and we are using pre-built test plans. So that includes likes of regression testing, and then stress testing and performance testing test plans. We have also utilized the dashboard test plans. So, we can just repeat the question once more.
Yeah, of course, I can do that. How does BI Validator ensure data accuracy and consistency across the environments?
Yeah, so basically, as I mentioned, we utilize these test plans, and as we went ahead in the journey through the software development lifecycle, the tool was intelligent enough to give us those data discrepancies, whether it's related to some of the pictorial representation which we're going to, whether there was a gap with the data. So it was the intuitiveness of the tool which actually helped us in terms of ensuring that while we are moving the code from one environment to another, there is some kind of a validation which we have in place, and we send those results right away to the business in terms of taking their sign off. Earlier, it was a cycle of manual testing that we used to do. So certainly,
Okay.
more intuitive and more helpful way to basically
Right.
address it. Yeah.
Yeah, another question coming in, and the question is, how can we build a culture of data quality in an organization?
Good question. The culture is driven in two ways. One is top down, and second is bottom up. And building a culture is not a easy thing. I feel it takes time to have that kind of a culture. I'm privileged that the bank has this kind of a culture already built on. And basically we utilize the best of the solutions in the market, whether it's related to data quality, ensuring data quality, because financial numbers they speak for itself. So there are a lot of solutions in the bank which are there. Apart from it, for reporting, we are happy to have a tool like BI Validator. But before that, we used to use DBT from Oracle especially for work system, and otherwise it was manual validation. So it used to take a huge lot of time. So very happy that we have a solution in place where which we could basically rely on and use for a future standpoint.
Okay. We have another question, and the question is, how does BI Validator tackle the challenges of provisioning diverse scenarios of reporting tools?
Good question, actually. I was anticipating this question. So the OAKS is something which we've utilized the BI Validator for. We are testing it for W as well. We do have in the bank Power BI as well, and I understand the BI Validator do support all the solutions, right? So we'll be happily exploring. We'll be exploring it thoroughly. We'll be happily exploring it for Power BI as well. Going forward. Basis the results, basis the experimentation, we'll certainly look at some decisions in future. I hope so far so good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Another question is, how does BI Validator enhance DevOps capabilities and speed up time to market?
Good question. So, we are currently experimenting with, so for as I understand from the product team, the end-to-end development cycle for Tableau is already built in and it's pre-integrated. For Oaks, Oracle BI, Oracle DB, this is something which is still kind of work in progress. We have a GitLab CICD cycle for Oracle BI. We want to integrate BI Validator with it end to end, so that it's a seamless process, a seamless route to live environment which we should have, and that will actually speed up the time to market. Because at this moment there is some fragmentation which is there. So to have the end-to-end DevOps, we certainly want to have this integration working. The tool is good, but from our perspective, we want to have this end-to-end cycle done, so that we get to a point where primarily one for a small feature. Let's say just citing an example. In a report, if you have to change the prompt or some formatting in the report, the development cycle is very small. It takes few hours to do that change. But taking it to production takes a good amount of time. Right? Now, with because you have to do the regression as well, just to see the impact on the reports. So, with this end-to-end integration, we can reduce the timeline from a week to a day or a day or two, and then that would be like a huge optimization in terms of time to market transfer. Yeah.
Okay. Now the next question is specific to the project using DataGap's solution. And the question is, what was the management's reaction to the first project completion? And this is actually coming from our very own David Small. So he wants to understand that what was the reaction of the management, and if you want to share about how important the receiving of the accolades and the write-up from the management was important for our partnership.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. Thanks, David. I think we looped in the management in that regard, in the appreciation. So our head of finance wrote a note as well. Appreciated the effort and recognized that we have a solution in hand apart from the work that we have done for the release, which basically can be a stepping stone for increasing the automation from a bank perspective. Overall, we endeavor to have optimizations in the route to life by 4 to 10 times. So all the areas are kind of working through to get that progress done. Specifically from a project perspective, it was a very well deserved achievement, and cherish the success, and certainly thanks to DataGap for ensuring that we were able to test those 15,000 reports. So yeah.
Okay. So I think we have covered all the questions here in the Q&A section. So with this, I will wrap up the session. So thanks, Sonpal, for answering all the questions and delivering valuable insights on the topic and helping us better understand the reporting platforms, their testing challenges and opportunities. Thank you, everyone, for joining this session. We hope you found this session insightful and engaging. Stay tuned with us for our upcoming session today in TDS. Check the agenda page for session details and explore what next. See you there. Thanks, Sonpal.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Thank you.